Working a 9 to 5 job can sometimes feel like a real grind, whether it's the monotony of repetitive tasks, the feelings of pressure or stress that come from the need to meet deadlines, or just generally not feeling fulfilled by what you're doing. This can be frustrating. And if you're in your 40s, 50s, or 60s, these feelings have grown through the years. And maybe you've been at this for 20, 30, or in my case, almost 40 years. You start to think about your options. Am I going to retire? Am I going to do something else? Can I retire? What would I do if I retire? Well, that's what I want to discuss today. First, I'm going to explore 4 options, lifestyles, ways our next chapter after the 9 to 5 could go, and just sort of talk through what they're like, why someone might choose them, and some of how I looked at it. And then if you stay with me to the end, I want to share some words of wisdom that have made a big difference in how I looked at my options and how I'm approaching this next chapter of my life after the 9 to 5. So before we dive in, I'd like to take a few seconds to introduce myself. Hi, everyone, and welcome to my channel. My name's John. After 39 years in the corporate world, I made the big decision to leave my job. Not to retire, but to reimagine what life could look like in my 60s and beyond. Now, I'm on a journey of discovery to find new purpose and meaningful pursuits beyond the constraints of traditional corporate work. Let's get started. So option number 1 is to keep working. So there's a number of reasons people look at this. I looked at it. I tried variations of it. Largely, I think this is people who really either have a passion for what they're doing, who really like the job they're in, and maybe there's times when it feels like a grind, but they're either able to get past that, or they are able to, or they just don't look at it that way. Maybe the passion for the job is so great that the things that might seem like a grind just don't weigh on them the same way. We see this a lot in entertainment. So folks like Harrison Ford, Clint Eastwood, Julie Andrews, these folks are going well into their 90s. Singers like Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney. I get it, like it's the entertainment industry, so it might feel like the job is just fun. Well, I think if you've ever really thought about it or looked at it, the rehearsals, the travel associated with doing concerts, being on movie sets, some of that can be a grind, but there's something they feel that's a passion for what they're doing that makes them stick with it. We also see this in the business world. The names that come to mind, people like Warren Buffett, Ellen Gordon, Roger Penske. These folks, again, they're in their, I'm going to say late 80s, some of them in their 90s, and they're running entire companies. And while that can seem like, oh, why wouldn't they leave? I can tell you, they definitely have the means to leave. They definitely have the financial ability to walk away. But there's, again, something about the passion for what they do, the way they've put themselves into it, that makes them keep going. And we also see this, so it's not just all the glamour jobs like entertainment and big business, but there's people, everyday people, who make this choice. I saw a news story a couple of weeks ago about a fella who was 95. Yeah, he was 95 years old, and he was choosing to stay in the same job. And he was working at, it was a deli or a market, and he just wanted to keep going. And when he talked about it, you could see the dedication and passion to his job that kept him there. He really enjoyed it. And in fact, the concept of retirement was foreign to him. When the reporter asked him, well, do you ever think about retiring? He was pretty quick to say, retirement is death. So clearly, the way he looked at it was that if he stopped doing this job that he loved, like a piece of him was going to go away, and that was just a path to the end. And he was not interested at all. He was going to keep going. I know people like this. I've personally seen people who, maybe not to 95, but well into their 70s, who just keep at it and they like what they're doing, or they find ways to get past the grind, or the grind just doesn't even register for them. This was an option that I looked at. Not that I thought I would do it till I was 95, but at 61, I could have gone for easily another 5, 6, maybe even 9 years till I was 70. And so I looked at ways to make that work. As I said in one of my other videos, I really did enjoy parts of my job. There was a creative element to what I did that was fulfilling. It was rewarding, and I liked learning new ways to do it. I also enjoyed doing presentations and working with teams. So I liked that part. But there were pieces that really were a grind. So I thought, well, maybe if I did some consulting, contracting work for a few years, that I'd be able to have a little more flexibility or some more influence over the types of project I worked on. And sometimes I did. It was nice to know that it could be short term, that if it wasn't working out, I could move on. There was also some levels of freedom. I wasn't tied to some of the things that a corporate job demands. Come to mind are like reviews and worrying about like annual salary discussions. Like all of that went away because I was just a contract worker. But again, in the end, it didn't work for me long term. There were parts of this way of looking at it that were appealing, but it wasn't where I was at. That was me. So I'm curious again. I always love it if folks who are here think about this another way. I'd love to hear your comments on this one. It's option number one. Option number two is what we'll call finding a second act. So I definitely landed more in this camp and sort of saw myself going this way. What this is so if you are not ready to walk away from work, and I'll say work in general, you more than just liking to be busy, but liking aspects of a job or what work, how we traditionally define work, how that feels for you. So if you like that, but it was time to make a shift away from something that was feeling like a real grind or that you weren't fulfilled by anymore, this is an option. So what this is plainly a second career. It could mean starting something completely different than what you did. I looked at some options, so I actually got a certification in personal training. I had always had an interest in fitness and also in nutrition coaching. I thought that maybe I would step away and just go do something like that. Uh, there were other things that people do. People look at doing training, teaching, other forms of coaching. These are all second acts. Maybe it's something completely different than what you worked at. So again, if you were in a corporate job, maybe you've always had a feeling that you wanted to do something smaller, whether it's working at a garden center or a local hardware store or something else. Maybe your job was more heads down, like you were in programming or technology, and now you want to do something that's more related to people. Those are all things that we consider. For me, again, there were elements of what I liked in my job. So the creative parts, I liked doing graphics, I liked presentations, I liked discussions. So what I ultimately landed on was trying to take some of the best parts of what I was doing and turn them into a second act. Um, it's just getting started. This channel is a part of it. In my case, the second act is going to look more like starting a business. It's just something I've always thought about. And again, we see this a lot, like folks who maybe were working in a corporate environment or a job, they're feeling that passion to start something that's their own and grow it. That is an interesting second act. It's one I'm sort of starting on. And again, curious to hear from all of you what your feelings are about this. Because again, there are other options. So the third lifestyle, the third option, as we'll call it, is one where it's not about work anymore. And I'm going to call this adventure seeking. So this is the one I think we think about a lot when people save up, they've managed to have a fairly decent amount of money, and they've decided to walk away from work, that place where you earn money altogether. And they're going to go out and do something different. And that could be exciting adventures like traveling, seeing the world, maybe going on that cruise that they always wanted to go on. I knew someone that I worked with long ago when they retired. They traveled to places that they hadn't been able to see and long vacations, 2, 3 weeks, not something that and knowing that they wouldn't be bothered, right? So sometimes in some jobs, even when you're on vacation, there's that problem that the phone might ring or you might have to have to be on a call. I did some of that through the years, not happy about it when I think back as to why I did that, but people do it. So again, I knew someone who went on a safari. It's not something I would have ever thought of, but they traveled and saw, things that I don't know that I'll ever see in person in my life. For others, adventure seekers, it's not extravagant trips or even costly ones. So people who don't have a lot of money, there's YouTube channels dedicated to folks who are moving to other countries, who have the sense of adventure that they'll go live in, Portugal or Costa Rica or some other country where the cost of living is lower. And that's their idea of an adventure. Some stay here in the United States, and maybe their adventure is, going RVing or taking trips that they drive to, going coast to coast in the country. That's an adventure. It's things that, again, I've thought about. I'm not quite sure which of them I would choose, and I don't know which you would choose, but that's a lifestyle. It's a whole choice where you're done with the work, but you want to keep doing things that are exciting and interesting. It's not for everyone. I mean, to be honest, there's any of these adventure type roles, they come with a couple of challenges. One is certainly the cost. If it's going to be something big and bold, you might not be able to do a lot of it, but it might be that one thing that you want to do. The other thing is they can take their toll too. Like some of these adventures, there's a lot of prep. If you're going to drive coast to coast, you're going to have some interesting parts of that adventure. Um, Travel, right? The hassles of going through airport security and getting somewhere. As I had to travel in my job, and then even when I travel on vacation, I always say I didn't mind being in the destination, but sometimes getting there was a real pain. So it can be a factor, or it can be some of what you look at when you look at how much adventure you want in this next chapter of your life. So the last lifestyle or way of living chapter that I'm going to talk about is what I'll call seeking tranquility. So it sounds good, right? Tranquility. And I don't mean just sitting around quiet all day long. Tranquility, being tranquil, is another way of saying not being disturbed, not being bothered. So for a lot of folks, when you leave your work environment, they just want not to be bothered, tranquility. They want to do the things that they wanted to do or they thought about doing. Maybe it's time by themselves, maybe it's time with other people, but in quieter settings and not bothered, not the busyness of going on adventures, not the uncertainty of starting a next act or a second act, but just more being in the moment. When I think about this category, the story I think about most is my own father. So he worked a career at least 40 years, and he retired when he was 63, 64. And it had been a haul. He definitely, towards the end, was not loving what he did. He was an engineer, and he definitely enjoyed. The man would design things, and the passion he had for solving problems. It was clear that he was born an engineer, wanted to be an engineer, and was meant to do that job. He would talk about it in some ways in very positive ways. But towards the end, and I know that it was just some of the things I talked about before, the monotony, there was the parts of the job he didn't want to do. So when he moved on, for him, tranquility wasn't about going on big vacations. He did go on a few, but he wasn't one that wanted to travel. He wasn't looking for adventure. He had enough of that in the early parts of his life, and he just didn't want to do that anymore. So for him, it was really three things. And I think about it when I picture him. So one, golf. Anyone who knew my father, my relatives, myself, if you knew my dad, the first thing that came to mind what he was going to do when he retired was golf. He liked being on the course. He was pretty darn good at it. Not professional, but pretty darn for an executive who played golf in the day. He loved the outdoors part of it. He liked the socialization. He had his group of friends that he was with, so it was a really tight circle of people that he would play with. I was fortunate to join him a couple of times and see that in action. And it was a form of tranquility, not to be bothered. There were no cell phones at the time, so nobody would bother him on the course for sure. And when he retired, he really put himself into that at least once a week, sometimes two. The second thing he liked, his passion, the tranquil passion, was his garden. He had a vegetable garden. He had had one from the time I could remember when I was young, and helping him with it, and right to the end. It got smaller over time because he didn't have maybe the stamina to make a big garden, but he would start this time of year in the winter. He would be planning what the next plantings would look like. He would draw pictures of what his garden layout would be. He would start to look at the seed packets, and he would start things inside. He would do the planting. When it came time, he would dig in the garden. And I think he just honestly liked turning over the soil and being out there. And it was so different than the job he had had, right? He enjoyed harvesting. He loved sharing the things that came out of his garden. Way too many tomatoes. Anyone who has a garden, way too many tomatoes, bags and bags all over, giving them away. But it was great. And he would give them to anyone that wanted them. For others, they really mean tranquility. So this might be a time of quiet. They've been around very busy environments, and they're really looking to pull back and spend some time on their own, and maybe take up practices like meditation or yoga, tai chi. Maybe go hiking. Maybe go on long walks solo, just to feel the serenity of not having busyness around them. I, you can tell from the way I'm talking about this, there's parts of this that I find really appealing. So it's that balance. And I think, again, depending on how we view things, how we feel, we may get bored with this. Some of us may feel that, like, okay, there's only so much golf I can play. There's only so much gardening I can do. There's only so much being, on my own I can stand. But again, some people just really, this is what they were looking for. So all that work, all that grind, when it was done, tranquility. And so now, as promised, my words of wisdom. So here we go. There's no one path. There's no right or wrong choice. We are all individuals, and none of this is set in stone. What we feel today, the abilities we have today, the means we have today, these change. These are things that evolve. As we look at these options, we can make them work. Again, I've described about myself personally, these options, I look at a little of each of them sometimes. There's elements of my job that I've taken with me that I'm still working at. There are new adventures in terms of starting a business, starting a channel. I'm an adventure seeker sometimes, maybe not as much as others, but I like a good trip. I like to go places, for sure. And moments of tranquility, even though I like to stay busy and I'm putting myself into this path of building something and doing a second act, I still like to pull back. Now that I don't have a 9-to-5 job, I love taking longer walks. I like working out for longer periods of time than I was ever able to do when I was working. I've gone back to practicing mindfulness and meditation for moments of tranquility. You can put these things together, you can combine them, they can overlap. It's all up to you. So this is a great time. Again, if you are considering leaving the 9-to-5 and taking that step, and maybe it feels uncertain, look at the options, research different ways you could go. Think about how you might work with a financial advisor to get your investments and means to a place that enables the future you want. Think about other options, as I talked about, reducing expenses, or maybe having different expectations about what comes next. Maybe starting a second act to fund the adventures you want to go on. It's all possible. And I just can't say enough. I'm enthusiastic for this next chapter of my life, and I hope you are too. And if you're feeling like you're stuck, unstick yourself. It's a great time to be looking at new ways to live the next chapter beyond the 9-to-5. The old views on retirement are changing, and for those of us in this stage, we have lots of options that those generations before us didn't have, and we should be taking advantage of them. So again, I hope you're going to find the right path or paths or combination of paths that gets you to where you want to be. And that's it. Those are my words of wisdom. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Have a great day.